When the pregnancy test showed positive, I knew my life was about to explode. The baby could be my husband's or his father's, and honestly, I'm not sure which would be worse, but they both had it coming. I'm Cordelia, 32, and I work as a hotel receptionist downtown. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. 6 months ago, my husband Marcus's dad, Richard, moved in with us after his messy divorce. Marcus works in IT and spends 14 hours a day staring at computer screens. When he comes home, he barely looks at me or our 6-year-old daughter Emma anymore. I've been invisible in my own marriage for years. Richard was completely different from his son. He actually listened when I talked about my day. He complimented my cooking and offered to help with dishes. He played board games with Emma and made her laugh in ways Marcus never did anymore. Richard would pick me up from work when Marcus was too busy, and we'd talk in the car about everything. My dreams, my frustrations, how desperately lonely I felt. The first time something happened was 3 months ago. Marcus was working late again, and Emma was at a sleepover. Richard and I were watching a movie, and he put his arm around me during a sad scene. Then he whispered that I shouldn't have to feel so alone. I looked into his eyes and saw everything I'd been missing. He kissed me, and I didn't stop him. For the first time in years, I felt wanted. We started meeting at his friend's empty apartment twice a week. Richard told Marcus he was job hunting, while I said I was shopping or visiting my mum. It worked perfectly for months until this moment. Now I'm sitting in my car staring at this test, trying to figure out what to do. The timing is impossible to calculate. It could be Marcus's from our monthly obligatory sex 4 weeks ago, or Richard's from any of our afternoon meetings. Either way, I'm completely screwed. But then I think about it differently. Maybe this is exactly what my dying marriage needs. A baby might bring Marcus and me closer together. He'd have to pay attention to his family again. I decide to tell Marcus it's his and pray for the best. What he doesn't know won't hurt him. That evening, I corner Richard in the kitchen while Marcus is upstairs with Emma. I whisper that we have a problem. I'm pregnant. Richard's face goes completely white. He asks if I'm sure it's his. I explain that I don't know whose it is, and that's exactly the problem. He runs his hands through his hair and says, "We need to end this immediately before Marcus figures anything out." I tell him it's too late for that. I'm announcing the pregnancy at dinner tonight. Richard looks at me like I've lost my mind. He asks if I'm serious. I tell him to watch me. At dinner, I make Marcus's favourite meal and open a bottle of wine. Emma is colouring at the table while Richard picks nervously at his food. I put my hand on my stomach and announce that I have wonderful news. We're having another baby. Marcus drops his fork. He asks what I mean. I tell him I'm pregnant, about 6 weeks along. Instead of joy, Marcus looks confused. He says 6 weeks, but we haven't been intimate much lately. He asks when this happened. My cheeks burn. I ask what kind of question that is, reminding him we're married. Marcus says he knows that, but then glances at his father, who suddenly becomes very interested in his mashed potatoes. Emma asks excitedly if she's getting a baby brother or sister. I quickly tell her yes, that she'll be a big sister again. But Marcus isn't celebrating. I can see him calculating, trying to remember our recent intimate moments. There haven't been many. After Emma goes to bed, Marcus corners me in the kitchen. He says he needs me to be completely honest about whose baby this is. I ask what kind of horrible question that is, pointing out that he's my husband. Marcus says that's not what he asked. Richard walks in right then, probably for a beer. The tension is so thick you could cut it. Marcus tells his dad to give us privacy. Richard says of course, but looks guilty as hell walking out. Marcus grabs my shoulders and says he's not stupid. Something's been off between Richard and me for weeks. The way we look at each other, how we both disappear at the same time, the strange tension in the house. He's noticed how I light up when Richard walks into a room, how I always volunteer to drive him places, how I've been buying new clothes and wearing perfume again. I tell him he's being paranoid, but my voice shakes. Marcus asks if he's really being paranoid, because right now he's wondering if his wife is carrying his baby or his father's baby. He says he's been thinking about this for days, counting back the weeks, remembering how distant I've been. The words hang in the air like a bomb. Once said, "There's no taking them back." I whisper, how dare he accuse me of something so disgusting. Marcus tells me to prove him wrong, to look him in the eye and swear I haven't been sleeping with his father. He says if I can do that convincingly, he'll apologize and will never speak of this again. I stare at him, trying to find a way out of this nightmare, but Marcus's eyes are cold and determined. He already knows the truth deep down. There's no escaping this moment. Finally, I say, fine, yes, I slept with Richard, but only because Marcus drove me to it with years of neglect and emotional abandonment. I tell him he stopped being a husband long before I stopped being a faithful wife. Marcus staggers backward like I physically hit him. He grabs the kitchen counter for support and says, "Jesus Christ," under his breath. I tell him not to act so shocked or betrayed. He ignored me for years while Richard was the only person who treated me like I actually mattered as a woman. Marcus yells that Richard is his father, his voice breaking. I yell back that Marcus is supposed to be my husband, but he forgot that part somewhere along the way when work became more important than his family. Marcus starts crying, which makes me feel terrible and furious at the same time. Why is he suddenly the victim here? I'm the one who's been lonely and ignored for years. He asks how long this has been going on, his voice barely a whisper. 3 months, I tell him honestly. Marcus repeats it slowly, like he's testing how the words sound coming out of his mouth. His wife has been sleeping with his father for 3 months. In his house, under his roof. I try to explain that it wasn't planned, that it just happened naturally between two lonely people who understood each other. Marcus says things like, "This don't just happen out of nowhere. I made conscious choices every single time to betray our family and destroy everything we built together." I shoot back that our family was already broken long before this affair started. The distance between Marcus and me had been growing for years, thick like fog, creeping in so gradually that we hardly noticed until it suffocated us. We hadn't really spoken in months, maybe even longer. We were coexisting, like polite strangers under the same roof, pretending things were normal for Emma's sake. The laughter, the warmth, the connection, all of it had long since evaporated, replaced with silence, tension, and the mechanical rhythm of shared responsibilities. Richard just helped me realize how dead our marriage really was. Marcus wipes his eyes and looks at me with pure disgust and disappointment. Then he tells me to get out of his house immediately. I ask what he means, my heart pounding. He says, "Get out tonight, pack my things and leave." He never wants to see me again. I protest that he can't just kick me out like this, that I live here too, that Emma lives here and needs her mother. Marcus says Emma stays with him permanently. I can figure out somewhere else to go and rebuild my life without them. I can't believe this is actually happening so fast. Everything feels like it's spiraling, spinning out of control faster than I can grasp it. My mind scrambles to find a foothold, to slow down what's slipping away with every breath. I feel like I'm watching my life collapse from the outside, unable to step in and stop it. This isn't just a fight. It's an unraveling, a total dismantling of everything I thought was stable. I beg him to let us work this out somehow, suggest marriage counseling, say we can fix this if we both try. Marcus's response destroys me completely. Fix this? I'm pregnant with his father's baby. There's absolutely nothing left to fix between us. The next morning, I'm staying at my mum's house, feeling lost and abandoned when Marcus's mother Patricia calls. Her voice is ice cold when she says we need to talk immediately. No pleasantries, no how are you holding up. I meet Patricia at a coffee shop downtown, dreading this conversation. She's already sitting at a corner table when I arrive, her face red and swollen from crying. She looks like she's aged 10 years overnight. As soon as I sit down, she begs me to tell her it isn't true, that her family isn't really destroyed. I start to speak, but she cuts me off with trembling hands. She needs me to tell her I didn't sleep with her ex-husband while married to her son. She needs me to say this is all some horrible misunderstanding. I try to explain that the situation is more complicated than it appears. I want to make her see the cracks that were already there, to understand the emotional emptiness I'd been living in. I want to tell her about the nights I lay awake beside a man who barely looked at me, about the pain of feeling invisible in my own home. I want her to see how desperately I clung to the smallest bits of affection, how I mistook attention for salvation, but no words feel right. No sentence feels strong enough to make her see beyond the betrayal. Her face is hardened by grief and fury, and my voice trembles under the weight of her contempt. Patricia slams her hand on the table, making other customers stare and coffee spill everywhere. She says it's not complicated at all. It's absolutely disgusting and unforgivable. I start to say she doesn't understand what I've been going through in my marriage, how lonely and invisible I felt. Patricia explodes with rage I've never seen before. What I've been going through? Her son is completely destroyed emotionally. He called her at 2 a.m, sobbing like a child, barely able to speak. She says she's never heard Marcus cry like that, not even when his grandfather died or when he broke his arm as a kid. He kept asking how this could happen in his own house, with his own father, while his innocent daughter was sleeping upstairs. I try to calm her down, saying Marcus will get over this eventually with time. People have affairs all the time, and marriages survive worse things than this if both people work at it. Patricia's response is devastating and cuts right through me, with their father-in-law, while living in the same house as their 6-year-old daughter. She asks how I could look Emma in the eye every morning, knowing what I was doing with her grandfather behind closed doors. Put like that, it does sound pretty terrible and twisted. But Patricia doesn't know the whole story of my neglected marriage. She doesn't understand what it's like to live with someone who treats you like furniture that he's gotten tired of looking at. I try to explain that her son ignored me for years, that Richard was there for me when Marcus wasn't. I tell her about the loneliness, the feeling of being completely invisible, how Richard made me feel alive and desired again. Patricia's voice rises dangerously, attracting more stares from other customers. So I decided to destroy their entire family. She says that's my solution to feeling neglected: seduce my father-in-law and get pregnant with his baby. I protest that I didn't destroy anything intentionally. I made a mistake, but families survive mistakes. People work through infidelity all the time with counseling and forgiveness. Patricia's voice gets even louder, almost shouting now. A mistake? I'm carrying that man's baby. That's not a mistake. That's deliberate betrayal of the worst kind. I remind her that we don't actually know whose baby it is yet. Patricia's response chills me to the bone. Oh, we're definitely going to find out. Marcus is demanding a paternity test the minute that baby is born. My stomach drops. A paternity test means the truth will come out no matter what story I tell. There will be no way to pretend the baby is Marcus's if it's not. I make one last desperate appeal, asking Patricia to think about Emma. She doesn't deserve to have her family torn apart over this. Patricia's response is brutal. I should have thought about Emma before I started sleeping with my father-in-law. That afternoon, Richard finally calls and says we need to talk urgently. We meet at the same apartment where we'd been having our affair. It feels completely different now, dirty and shameful instead of exciting and romantic. I tell him that Marcus knows everything. Richard says he figured that out when Marcus threw him out of the house that morning. I'm shocked. Marcus actually threw him out? Richard nods grimly. Marcus told him if he ever saw him again he'd kill him. Richard believes him completely. I start crying then. Everything is falling apart so incredibly fast. I ask what we're going to do about the baby. Richard sits down heavily and says he needs to tell me something important. This wasn't his first affair since his divorce. Actually, it wasn't even his second. I ask what he means, feeling sick to my stomach. He explains that he's done this before with other women. It's apparently a pattern for him when he's feeling lonely or displaced. There was his neighbour's wife, then his ex-wife's sister, and now me. It's always the same. He finds vulnerable women going through rough patches in their marriages. I feel sick to my stomach. I ask if he's saying I was just another conquest, another notch on his belt. Richard quickly says no, that's not what he means at all. He did care about me genuinely, more than the others. But he's not good at committed relationships or facing consequences. That's exactly why his wife divorced him in the first place. She caught him with her best friend. I ask what he's trying to tell me about our situation. His answer completely destroys me. If this baby turns out to be his, he wants absolutely nothing to do with it. He can't handle being a father again at his age, especially not under these circumstances. He's already caused enough damage. I stare at him in complete shock. Is he really abandoning me right now? Richard says he's just being realistic about an impossible situation. There's no happy ending here for anyone, especially not for the baby. I remind him that he said he loved me, that this meant something special. He admits he did love me and still does in his way, but love isn't enough to fix this disaster we've created together. Richard leaves that day and I never see him again. He moves to another state within a week without even saying goodbye to Emma, who keeps asking where Grandpa went. 2 weeks later, Marcus agrees to meet with me to discuss Emma's custody arrangement. We meet at a restaurant near his office. Right away, Marcus says he wants full custody of Emma. I remind him that she's my daughter too. His response stings deeply. I'm not exactly Mother of the Year material right now. I protest that isn't fair, that I made one mistake. Marcus corrects me harshly. One mistake? I had an affair with his father for 3 months while living in their house with their daughter. That's not one mistake. That's dozens of deliberate choices to betray our family. Marcus looks absolutely terrible. He's lost weight and has dark circles under his eyes. But I don't feel sorry for him. He drove me to this with his neglect. He continues that he'll give me supervised visitation, but Emma will live with him permanently. I ask about the baby. If it turns out to be his, we'll figure something out, he says. If it's not his baby, he shrugs like it's not his problem. I make one final desperate plea. Can't we try to work this out somehow? For Emma's sake. Marcus is completely firm. There's nothing to work out. Our marriage is over forever. I tell him I still love him. He laughs bitterly. I have a really funny way of showing love. 3 months into my pregnancy, I get another call from Patricia saying she needs to see me again. It's about Richard. We meet at the same coffee shop as before. Patricia looks even more exhausted than last time. She tells me that Richard called Marcus yesterday. I ask what he wanted, to confess everything apparently. His conscience finally kicked in after all this time. My heart starts racing. I ask what exactly he confessed. Everything, Patricia says, including the fact that I had told him Marcus was planning to divorce me anyway, which justified the affair in my mind. I protest that I never said anything like that. Patricia drops another bombshell. Richard also mentioned that this wasn't my first affair. Something about a co-worker named Jake from 2 years ago, and apparently there were details about hotel rooms and weekend business trips that never happened. I feel like the ground is disappearing under my feet. How could Richard possibly know about Jake? I was so careful back then. I try to deny it completely, saying I have no idea what she's talking about, that Richard is obviously making things up to deflect blame from himself. Patricia says Marcus is devastated all over again. He thought the thing with his father was a one-time mistake born from loneliness and neglect. Now he discovers I've been cheating on him for years, that our entire marriage has been a lie. I insist that's not true, that Jake was just a friend from work. We maybe had lunch a few times, but nothing happened. But Patricia says Richard seemed to know way too many intimate details for someone who was just guessing about an old friendship. Details about birthmarks and habits that only a lover would know. I realize then that Richard must have been investigating me somehow. Maybe he went through my old phone records or emails while living in our house. Maybe he found photos or messages I thought I'd deleted. The thought makes me physically sick. I ask what Marcus wants now, dreading the answer. Patricia's answer is absolutely devastating. Full permanent custody of Emma with no visitation rights whatsoever. And he never wants to see me again for the rest of his life. He's already contacted a lawyer about having my parental rights terminated. I protest that he can't do that legally since I'm Emma's biological mother. Patricia's response is brutal. I'm also a serial cheater who's pregnant with his father's baby. She wishes me good luck explaining that to any family court judge. The paternity test happens immediately after the baby is born. I name her Sophie. The results come back 2 weeks later, and my worst fears are confirmed. Richard is definitely the father. Marcus refuses to even hold Sophie or look at her. Patricia cries when she hears the news. Even my own mother seems ashamed of me. My mum asks how I could possibly do this to my family. I try to explain that I was desperately lonely and neglected. Nobody understands what I went through in that marriage. Mum asks if sleeping with my father-in-law was really my solution to marital problems. I say I made a mistake, and people make mistakes all the time. My mother's response cuts deep. This wasn't a mistake, she says. This was a terrible, selfish choice that hurt everyone who loved me. But I don't see it that way at all. I see it as finally standing up for myself after years of being taken for granted and ignored. The divorce is finalized 6 months later. Marcus gets full custody of Emma with only supervised visitation for me twice a month. He also gets the house, the car, and most of our savings. Richard never contacts me about Sophie. Never sends money or asks to see her. He disappears from our lives completely, just like he promised he would. I move into a tiny apartment with Sophie and try to rebuild my life from scratch. But everywhere I go, people know my story. Marcus's family made sure of that. The final devastating blow comes last month. Emma, now 7 years old, tells me during one of our supervised visits that she doesn't want to see me anymore. The social worker is sitting right there taking notes. I ask why not, calling her sweetheart, trying to keep my voice steady. Emma looks at me with Marcus's eyes and says, "It's because I hurt Daddy. And I hurt Grandma Patricia. And I made Grandpa Richard go away forever." She says the kids at school know about what I did, and they tease her about having a bad mommy. I try to remind her that I'm her mommy, and I love her more than anything in the whole world. I tell her that grown-up problems are complicated and she shouldn't worry about them. Emma's response breaks my heart completely. If I really loved her, I wouldn't have done such bad things to our family. She says Daddy cries sometimes at night when he thinks she's sleeping. She asks why I chose to hurt everyone instead of being a good mommy. Out of the mouths of babes. My own 7-year-old daughter is judging me just like everyone else. Even the social worker looks uncomfortable. But here's what none of them understand or want to acknowledge. I didn't set out to hurt anyone intentionally. I was just trying to survive in a marriage that was slowly killing my soul. Richard made me feel alive again, made me remember who I was before I became Marcus's ignored wife and Emma's overwhelmed mother. Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, people got hurt badly. But I absolutely refuse to spend the rest of my life apologizing for finally putting my own happiness first for once. As I sit here now, watching Sophie sleep peacefully in her crib, I realize something important. She's absolutely beautiful and perfect, and she's completely mine. Whatever else happened, she's the one genuinely good thing that came out of all this mess.